everybody? It is Steve, your friendly neighborhood lawn gnome. Welcome back to another video over here on That's Comical. And if you're watching and it happens to be a Wednesday, happy new comic book day. Very excited to see everybody again. We are now officially at the halfway point of 2024. But don't fret, there's still a lot of great stuff happening over here on the channel, including the next video that we're recording today for Ultimate Journey. And it's just not going to be a great Ultimate Journey if I don't have another very well-versed comic fan here in the room. Andy, of course, great to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. I'm glad to start our other ultimate journey.
Yeah, so just in case you guys don't know what we're talking about, the good news is you don't really have much to catch up on. There's only one video previous, and the playlist link will be provided in the box below. But just in case you're all curious as to why I'm wearing a specific shirt, I am going to make sure that when we get to the end of the Marvel Ultimate Journey, to remind everybody why I wore this specific shirt. So anyway, when we last had our Ultimate Journey, we started off with Crisis on Infinite Earths over on the DC side, leading all the way up to what may be known as the greatest DC story ever told, Blackest Night. But in regards to Marvel, there are so many great stories that Marvel has to offer, but there is not one that had the serious impact and a story that truly did change the Marvel universe forever, and that is 2015's Secret Wars by Jonathan Hickman. But there's a very big difference between DC's Ultimate Journey starting point and Marvel's Ultimate Journey starting point. And that is, if you're a newcomer to Marvel Comics and you want to start at a certain pinpoint, tonight we're going to be going over a very iconic story, which is our starting point until leading to Secret Wars. And that, of course, is House of M by Brian Michael Bendis and fantastic artwork by Olivia Coipel. Andy, I don't know if you're going to agree with me or not, but this is definitely not a starting point for a first-time Marvel reader.
No, definitely not. And it stands in stark contrast to how we felt, or at least I felt, but I think I can speak for both of us with Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's weird to recommend a starting point for comics like there is such a thing as a beginning point. It's one of those things where pick a story you like, become immersed in it, go back, read more, read a series, read the tie-ins if you want, go back and read them later when you realize you would have enjoyed it. With our journey in DC, we kind of start at this moment of universe altering, earth shifting, clear kind of path for these characters you can then begin to understand from that moment. By contrast, our story over here in Marvel is one that is building to a universe shifting moment. And you kind of need to, they're inverses of each other. What we're doing in DC is this big starting point that then goes to a payoff that rewards you for having known all of this minutia of stuff that happened since the starting point. With Secret Wars, since we're going to kind of that world reduction later,
Yeah.
we are going to be going broad and trying to absorb as much as we can so that we can feel as rewarded as we can be by that universe shifting moment when we get to it, to feel all the feelings that come from that simplicity. So it's almost like these stories go in reverse, which is really an interesting thing, but they are rewarding in their own way for the stories they are telling like that.
Yeah, I actually didn't think about it that way. So I really do appreciate that specific point. But as I said during the first episode of Ultimate Journey on the DC side, I did say that while we go down our journey, we will be offering opportunities to find out about stuff that you can do a little bit more of a deeper dig. So if you want to get some more perspective and you want to see, well, how did we get from point B? What exactly was point A? We're going to be doing that, I think, a lot more frequently with Marvel than we are with DC. And I think that that's just because of one of the major disadvantages that I think Marvel has in terms of events or stories leading up to events. They have a plethora of tie-in to their event stories. So we're only going to be giving you the main meat of House of M. But according to a lot of resources, one that I specifically follow is Comic Book Reading Orders. There is a total of 64 books linked to House of M. So you really do have a choice. It is, you can read everything. If you just take a look at the list of the stories that are part of it, the tie-ins and the core, read what you feel is interesting. So in my case of House of M, I read House of M Civil War, I read House of M Fantastic Four, and a couple of other tie-ins. But after reading them, as enjoyable as they weren't necessarily exact connections to the story. These are basically stories that are just going on while the main story is happening. Now, there are times in events where tie-ins will be a very direct link to the main story. As a matter of fact, DC is doing their summer event right now called Absolute Power, and their tie-ins are mostly connected to the core story. But at the same time, we're having Marvel Blood Hunt going on at the moment, and some of the tie-ins are very much disconnected from the core story. As a matter of fact, and I don't mean to ramble, but I'm just trying to put a little bit more of a perspective here. I picked up the first and only Blood Hunt issue in my collection. I picked up Incredible Hulk Blood Hunt issue number 1, and it was more connected to the current Incredible Hulk story that Philip Kennedy Johnson is writing in the comics, and less than the actual Blood Hunt story. And I will say it was my favorite read of the week because it was just so damn fun. But that's one of the issues. And we are also going to give you guys a little bit more perspective in just a little bit. Andy, I just want you to say your piece first.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right about that. And we didn't really have a chance to touch on it due to the nature of Crisis on Infinite Earths. But there are a ton of tie-in stories. You're right. That's a crazy amount of comics. I would venture to say that in our lead up to Secret Wars 2015, that this particular event is not one where I personally think there's all that much value in reading many, if any, of the tie-ins. And that's because it was much harder for us to pick a starting point here. This one does make sense, but it doesn't feel to me like the specifics of the broader world around this event and the way it lightly touched on other stories, at least at this time in Marvel Comics, is going to be super, super relevant to Secret Wars. So I think the core story and the main, which we will get to, plot of House of M is the important part here. If you just really like House of M and want to read some of the tie-in stories to get more of that moment in time, that's cool, that's fine. But for the purposes of our journey kind of informing where we're going, I would say this is probably a safe one to grab those core 8 issues and then just keep going.
And another thing that I would say that is actually advantageous of the Marvel Ultimate Journey here on That's Comical is I think you're going to be hearing a little bit more about Marvel's history rather than DC's, because Crisis on Infinite Earths is really a good starting point. But there are so many things that I can recommend personally to new Marvel Comics readers out there, because one of the interesting things about the year that House of M was written, it was in 2005. And a couple of years before that, and definitely leading up to Secret Wars, I don't know about you, Andy, but I think that these may be some of Marvel's darkest storytelling years. Now, even though a lot of people, when we hear about the history of comic books and we think about, well, what was the story that broke the campiness of comics and brought them back to their dark roots? Well, most people are going to say Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. But I hate to break it to everybody, Marvel got there first. They were creating stories like the death of Gwen Stacy in the early 70s, very closely followed by the Dark Phoenix saga. And that is where I'm going to start by saying this story has no connection to House of M whatsoever. But my God, I say that you need to get your hands on every trade of Chris Claremont's X-Men and you have got to read his run because it is iconic. It is basically what made. I gotta be honest, Andy, if it wasn't for Chris Claremont, forget all the other great writers and artists that came before him. Chris Claremont was what turned Marvel into the powerhouse storyteller that we know
We'd
today.
have no Marvel the way we know it without Chris Claremont, and specifically without Chris Claremont's X-Men. We just
And
would.
and
We
so
just
many
wouldn't.
great stories.
It's a different beast. You could do a journey of talking about reading everything he did for X-Men and have a wonderful time. Obviously, what it did is sort of important to the existence of this story we're talking about now. It's divorced from Secret Wars, but House of M, while I talk about the book at hand, House of M, trades in your knowledge of mutants and how much you care about these X-Men characters. And yes, the Avengers matter too, and we're going to talk about some of them. But it's very interesting. The same way that Crisis on Infinite Earths had this huge amount of history that informs it that goes to a breaking point. We are similarly doing that here by choosing to start with House of M, but it's a breaking point for a comparatively narrow slice of Marvel, albeit an intensely fan favorite one, and one that will have ramifications for years to come for several books, even though it is narrow. But still, it is a different beast. It is one that you can enjoy on its own, this story, but it is informed by X-Men Past too. So while we're not going to say in order to read Secret Wars and enjoy it, you need to read everything Chris Claremont ever wrote for X-Men.
No, you just need to read Chris Claremont for the sake of reading Chris Claremont's run.
You read Chris Claremont for the sake of reading Chris Claremont, and put a little asterisk at the end of our start with House of M and just say, you'll enjoy House of M more the more you know about X-Men. Nevertheless, we got to pick you starting somewhere that is like hopefully not more than 10 years before Secret Wars.
Well, I would say that let's at least start where this House of M story begins. And I will say that this was definitely the best years of Brian Michael Bendis's writing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to also do a very interesting little twist during the Ultimate Journey, and it's going to come much sooner than later. Andy, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll bring you up to speed after this recording. But let's just say that it has to do, at the end of the day, with introducing the Maker and Miles Morales, who are two core people in Secret Wars.
Yeah.
But you're going to start this story. It's 8 issues, and it's going to be a very well-known character in Marvel, Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch. If you are a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, you will probably know everything there is to know about her from the movies, and you know what a powerful mutant she is, especially after seeing a show like WandaVision and a film like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And a little bit of this story is put into some of those films, as a matter of fact, some of Secret Wars as well. So she starts off surrounded by friends, and she is about to give birth to twins. And she is happy, her husband Vision is happy, and everybody is on cloud 9 until all of a sudden, after the twins are born, she hears a voice. And the voice is saying, "Wanda, stop it." And it turns out that that voice is none other than Professor Charles Xavier, saying that what is happening is not real, and you've got to stop doing this because you are hurting people. Then when we actually see the veil pulled away, we see that she is not surrounded by friends. Rather, she is twisting and turning and sweating in a bed inside a hollowed out building in a place called Genosha. And she is only accompanied by 2 people, her father, who is Magneto, and her brother, Pietro, who, of course, is the mutant Quicksilver. Now, before we move forward, here is where I feel some required reading is necessary. You're probably going to say to yourself, how did we get here? And more importantly, if you haven't seen the X-Men cartoon, if anything, what the hell is Genosha? And what happened to Genosha? So I would say the first thing that you need to do is you need to read the first small story arc that was written by Grant Morrison's New X-Men issues 113, 114, and 115. and that is called E is for Extinction. You can even go a little further back into Chris Claremont's run right before Fall of the Mutants, I believe, and read about the first introductions of Genosha. But long and the short of it, Genosha is a country in the United States, in the world of Marvel, where mutants are mostly the population, and there are millions of people living there in peace. And all of a sudden, a mysterious attack happens, and Genosha is destroyed, and millions of mutants are killed. It's a massacre. So that's basically where we get to hollowed out Genosha. But why is Scarlet Witch in this state? Well, it's because of what happened in the big story right before House of M, which is what leads into House of M, and it's called Avengers Disassembled. Basically, Wanda's powers are getting way too much for her to handle, where she is not fighting the forces of evil, but rather she is hurting her friend. And one of the people that she hurts is none other than her fellow Avenger, Iron Man, aka Tony Stark. And people think that he might have gone back to alcoholism, because if you don't know much about Tony Stark, he was an alcohol abuser. There's even a great old Iron Man story called Demon in a Bottle. You don't need to read it, but I definitely would say if you want to read a good Iron Man story, it is probably the best solo Iron Man story. And there's also a big fight right in front of the Avengers Mansion. And we learn later on in this story, when you see the X-Men and the Avengers and some other major heroes in the Avengers Mansion talking about what to do about Wanda, we find out that Hawkeye's killed, because Hawkeye was unfortunately killed by Scarlet Witch in Avengers Disassembled. So that is what leads up to our starting point. So I would definitely recommend read E is for Extinction in the X-Men books and read Avengers Disassembled. You don't necessarily have to read the entirety of Avengers Disassembled. Believe it or not, I did, and I pretty much enjoyed most of it. But definitely the core 4 issues, I think it was 4 or 5 issues, I can't remember. I think it's 4. Mm-hmm. But Avengers Disassembled is a very powerful book. I really did enjoy it. So that's what gets us to this point. Also 2 issues of Excalibur, basically how Magneto comes in, swoops up Wanda, and brings her to the deserted Genosha. So yes, as I said earlier, there are the Avengers and the X-Men sitting in this building having a meeting about what to do about Wanda. And there are some very interesting little nuances that you see in this moment. I think one of the most interesting parts is when Wonder Man and Captain Marvel are walking into the meeting, and they say, I didn't really know we were that important to be at this meeting.
Yeah, that's a funny moment, to say the least. I also, to just jump back for a second, I think it's really good that you shared that detail, Steve, about where people can go to dig a little deeper into this one, since it's our kind of semi-arbitrary starting place. But I will emphasize for people that with a vague understanding and a background of X-Men generally, you can enjoy this one. Even if you don't know every hero who happens to be a part of the core Avengers team at this moment in time, if what you're familiar with is the movies and you go back and you're trying to read stuff, you can follow this one from where it is. You might not know how many people lived in Genosha, but like you can kind of pick up, like, this was devastation. You will pick up on something bad happened between Scarlet Witch and the rest of the Avengers, and you'll be able to follow it. This beginning point of the story, I think, is I also just find it really funny, the idea that with the way the characters have been portrayed in current day, if you're going back and reading House of M right now, it's really funny to hear Carol Danvers say that she might not be all that important. I think a lot of current fans have a very different read on the character at this stage. But anyway, this is where our action starts. We open on the mutants with something being wrong, realizing that Wanda is experimenting with reality a little too much out of her own emotional needs. And the X-Men, the Avengers, get together to discuss it.
hmm And so they decide that the best thing to do is to just. I'm not necessarily going to say, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't think they decided what to
They
do
did
with
not.
her.
They
But
did not decide what to do.
Quicksilver believed that they were coming to kill her.
I think Quicksilver is so incredibly protective of his relationship with Wanda that as soon as the question is posed on the table, that is too much for him. He needs to go, he needs to report on it and assume the most dire outcome. I don't know for a fact which way that meeting would have ended because there are some strong voices on both sides of it. Um, you also get a very funny moment out of Peter Parker in this
Yeah.
meeting where he goes, geez, if my powers run amok, I guess I can count that you guys are going to kill me. And Wolverine is just like, yeah, and I would hope you do the same to me. And it's
You see,
just like, yeah.
that's the
So you,
funniest thing. That's one that you can expect. The truth of the matter is, would you have ever actually expected Spider-Man to say something like that?
well, I mean, it's funny because it's joking. It's an interesting characterization though, because like at the end of the day, with the responsibility that Spider-Man puts to the forefront of his character, I could actually see him being characterized the other way, which is the like, this is the grave responsibility I share because I have all this power. If it ever went haywire, I couldn't risk hurting people with it. I do think it's a flippant moment played for laughs though, which we need because this story is about to become very emotionally taxing. Um, we're about to we're about to watch characters go through something really bad. And not only that, we're about to watch characters suffer through something really good
Yeah.
in order to get
But
to something
but
really
you
bad.
see, I wouldn't expect Spider-Man to say something like that, but I would expect Wolverine to respond like that, because don't
Yeah.
forget, he was in that position where he
Yes.
had to try and kill Jean Grey during the Dark Phoenix saga,
Yes.
and it was
Yes.
painful for him to even try it.
Yes. No,
So
With Wolverine, it is a moment that gets a nice laugh in the book, but it's completely consistent. Wolverine is the one who needs to be the one to respond to that question specifically. It's
right.
it's a great moment. It sets the stakes. And what it does do for me though is even though I'm not sure which way that meeting ends, like I said, there's strong voices on either side of that argument. And that alone is too much for Quicksilver. And so
Exactly.
Pietro runs off and he's like, nope, we gotta, they're gonna kill her. They're gonna kill
And
her.
because of the fact that he is very much, just spewing word vomit, not really thinking clearly, he's really putting Magneto in a very serious bind. And even though Wanda is not in a really great place, she can hear what's going on too. And then he finally wakes up and he says, they're coming to kill you. And so all of a sudden, it's of course Spider-Man who suddenly says, something's not right here. I don't
Yeah.
feel well. And then all of a sudden, everybody fades out into white. And then we see Peter, but instead of where he was, he's lying in bed, hearing the sounds of a baby's crying. And he wakes up, and a woman next to him says, it's your turn to feed the baby. And it's not Mary Jane, it's Gwen Stacy. And that's how House of M really starts to take off.
Yeah. Then this is why I say we go through, we're going to need to watch some semi happiness kind of in order to feel the emotional weight of all of this. Um,
Exactly.
because we then encounter multiple characters living very, very different lives that have been granted to them in this incredible change of reality globally, the likes of which really demonstrate the depth of power that Wanda has at her disposal that she can turn to. It is, it is terrifying how much power she has in this moment. Um, so I mean, we see we see many characters now leading a different life. I'm sure we'll spend different amounts of time on each of them. My personal favorite was probably Captain America. I thought that was really
Yeah.
cool. What
And there's
his
also there's an excellent one-shot tie-in that basically is all about his life leading up to that moment in House of M. So I
Mhm.
would definitely recommend that one little tie-in. It's just one comic, but it was a very, very good read. But
Yeah.
yeah, Captain America, he got the super serum, he fought for his country, and he never got frozen in time. He got to live his life and
Yep.
just become an old man and just be satisfied.
Yeah. Yeah. And we
Because that's
get
what
to
we all
see
want for Captain America.
exactly, exactly. It's interesting though, because not to let the cat out of the bag too quickly, but I think it's important for a retrospective discussing it. I mean, what we're seeing is these are the lives that theoretically these people want to live and would
Mhm.
choose to live. Um, and I think there's a great heaviness in why we as the readers feel so not just off put by it not being quote unquote real, but sad in seeing these things, because it is loss that makes so many of our favorite Marvel characters who they are. From the inception of Marvel, they have been to different extent over time as it became more modernized, the place with flawed heroes, and people who felt real. And we've talked about this before on the channel. Marvel led to kind of that creation of the imperfect hero that let people feel like, oh, this person is like me. They're not a cookie cutter. They've got something to them. And seeing the hardship stripped and seeing people get a version of everything they wanted feels very unsettling to the reader who knows who these people are and what Marvel Comics is about. You have a heavy sense of this can't last. You have a heavy sense of this isn't right.
This is too good to be true.
And it leaves me, and not to go too far afield, but I want to say it at some point in this episode, it leaves me with that feeling of discomfort and sadness around we're not able to accept the happiness of these heroes because we see it as not real. And our version of these heroes are ones that struggle. And there's an inherent sadness in kind of the funeral march towards this is comics, something will change, right? And it won't stay like this.
Yeah.
Anyway, I find it a very impactful story for many reasons. And there's even bigger moment later for Marvel fans, which I know we'll talk about, of course. Um, but and you're right, Steve, to point out the one shot about Captain America, because we can talk a little bit about some tie-ins if we have any. I only read in preparation for this, though, the core
Yeah.
issues. I'm just
Me too.
familiar with some of the tie-ins. Um, Reading those and seeing how people live their lives in this strange alternate version, a different reality, if you will, a different time, if you will, of the Marvel heroes, can be very impactful. And that extends to other characters, not just the mutants. I mean, we see Luke Cage in this
Yeah.
story too. Talk about Luke
Yeah.
Cage.
That's
Yeah.
where things are showing us that even though this is supposed to be a perfect world for some, it's not necessarily a perfect world for all, because I don't really consider Luke Cage's life perfect. He's like the head of an underground gang that's trying to bring down Wilson Fisk.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like there's still troubles. I mean, Wolverine and Mystique and a couple of other big faces are working for Shield. So clearly, we're not in a perfect world if Shield's still existing. But
Mm-hmm.
but the big thing that's very different, which is also the reason why it's called House of M, is because the leaders of the free world are Magneto and his children.
Mm-hmm.
That's number one. And superheroes are pretty much known to the public, and the public doesn't bother with them. As a matter of fact, in this reality, Captain Marvel and Wonder Man are the two most popular heroes. But at the same time, you also have a world where mutants and humans are coexisting, and mutant history is being taught in schools. And we see that through the fact that Kitty Pryde happens to be back in her native Chicago teaching a classroom that is mostly made up of mutants.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
long and the short of it, what did Wanda do? She pretty much created a world where everybody's biggest desires are officially true. And I also just want to say, I really did appreciate the fact that you said without the flaws, it just doesn't seem to be the same in regards to the heroes. And
Yeah.
it was actually Chris Claremont himself who said it best. It's like when people were reading Spider-Man, it wasn't about Spider-Man beating up Green Goblin or Dr. Octopus. It was about, is Peter Parker going to get the test in on time?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nope, that's exactly right. And speaking of Peter, he's one of the hardest characters to watch in this
Yeah,
story. His reality, we already talked about his waking up next to Gwen Stacy, and then
the baby.
it's not just that. There's other people still around too, and it's tough to
Yeah,
see.
Uncle Ben is still alive. There's no negative press about him. And even though I think he is still working at the Daily Bugle, people love
Yeah,
the
I
fact that Spider-Man is working for the Daily Bugle.
yeah,
And
and there's that wonderful panel that it's a spread when I'm glad that it was Spider-Man who got this, but his like splash of memories, it drives home how much the Spider-Man character matters and how much we love Spider-Man. And Spider-Man's going to be really important to this entire journey. So I'm always happy to talk about Spider-Man when he comes up. The kind of spread of all those big moments in Spider-Man's past that come rushing back as the real reality is there just reminds us of how much he matters and how much you can't have Spider-Man without that history. And I think it
so,
was a beautiful page.
right. And so then we're brought to Wolverine in probably one of the most unsettling ways possible.
Yeah.
And I kind of love the fact that he is the main character of this story in terms of reaching the end game of House of M. And it's only appropriate because this year actually happens to be the 50th anniversary of the character's creation. So I'm glad that we're actually talking about Wolverine today.
That feels insane to me.
I know. Yeah,
That's
he was originally
insane.
brought to us in 1974. Is that crazy or what?
Yes.
And so all of a sudden, he is. What was he doing with Mystique? Like, what do we call this?
We're gonna artfully pass over it.
Yeah.
But it was, but you are correct. It was a very uncomfortable way to pull us into where Wolverine is in his life right now. Um, but it did. You're right. So Wolverine ends up actually becoming our lens to the majority of this story here, for very interesting reasons that I think work well enough. We'll talk about the end game of it here, but it seems like Wolverine comes to and he's like, this is not right. What is going on? And seemingly, Wolverine is the only one who understands that something is going on that isn't right.
Yeah, that's the part that's very interesting. He's the one that, quote unquote, is the first to wake up
Mm-hmm.
and realize that this is nothing but a fantasy. And it's not my personal fantasy. This is somebody else's fantasy.
Yeah.
And one of the other, and especially if you read uh, Avengers Disassembled, which I forgot to mention, is also written by Brian Michael Bendis. If you have read that and then you go straight to House of M, this is where one of the major hard hitting moments comes to pass when Wolverine gets a flashback of everything that he's supposed to know. And he's like, I know what's going on here. And it's really funny because even before he woke up, he felt that there was something not quite right. But then after he wakes up and he sees Hawkeye, Clint Barton alive, that's when the reader, especially like I said, if you read Avenger Disassembled, that's going to hit you hard.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very big moment, a very big moment. And I think kind of Wolverine's solo streak really plays well to the drama of the story too, that he then finds it upon his shoulders, not just to get the gang back together, but to play the role of convincing the gang that the world is
Yeah.
not the world that they know, which is an interesting role for him to fall into.
Yeah, because especially as the characters slowly wake up, they start seeing what their lives are really supposed to be like. Some of them don't take it that well. I think another one that really hits hard is when they wake up Scott Summers and Emma Frost.
Yeah,
You know, even if you've never read an X-Men comic, if you've seen the cartoon, most people, there are more people in this world that know the X-Men from the famous animated series and
yeah,
X-Men 97 now, which I highly recommend if you haven't watched it yet. It's a beautiful follow-up. But Cyclops, Scott Summers has had a very tough life. You know, he was one of the most, he had gotten so many trials and tribulations. And to find out that he actually had a happy life, and the fact that if you really think about it, it's not something that is even harped upon, but basically, we're living in a world where he and Jean Grey never, ever had a relationship. It seems that he just, Emma Frost was the first woman he met that he fell in love with. There was no Jean Grey.
yeah, yeah. And they even say at one point in the story, it's like Scott even says, like, us married, like this is the thing that we're granted, okay, like, but it's, I think it underscores what you're saying, Steve, which is he's had such a hard existence and he's had such a hard life up to this point. It's almost like, well, what the hell do you offer him? what
Exactly.
is it, what is it that he dares in his mind hope for that will be offered to him in this alternate world, right?
Mhm.
So so there is that, but I think his underlying leadership, of course, shines through and comes into play later in the story as well.
Yeah. And even when we take a look at what's going on with Magneto and his children, even on their side, little cracks are starting to form, and they're definitely knowing that there are bigger things at play, aka Wanda's powers. I mean, also, I think I was glad when they officially woke Doctor Strange, because I think he was having a very terrible life in this world.
Yeah, I
He
think
just,
so.
yeah, he just seemed like a guy that was just like, oh dear God, just shoot me now. But
Yeah.
but of course, then we get to the hardest part of the story to watch, and that is Peter Parker waking up, Spider-Man waking up. That is, you you know, it's why you said why he's so popular, because you can relate to him. And like when he is woken up and he sees his extremely flawed world and his extremely flawed self, it gets to the point where he just almost goes mad. Like,
Yeah.
not everybody else had the breakdown that he did. He was the hardest when it came to breaking him.
He was completely, his entire person was pulled out from under him. And it's not like they were events that didn't happen that he didn't deal with, but they built him, by tearing him down, by building him up. But it was like this one moment, ripping the band-aid off. Hey, here's all of that Spider-Man Peter Parker trauma. Here it is. It's like
Mm-hmm.
really, really rough, to the point where Emma Frost needed to just have his, this reality family walk away. It's like, this is going to take some time. We're not going to be able to get through this. He's not going to be able to go, okay, see you guys later. Hey guys, we got to talk. No, he had a complete breakdown and needed to be completely isolated in order to get through that.
And the same thing with Hawkeye. It's like he actually wakes up and he says, I'm not even supposed to be here.
Yeah, yeah,
It's tough. It's really tough. And that's why I keep saying it's like what happened to Brian Michael Bendis? Like, what caused his fall from grace? You read stories like this and all of the other stuff that he was doing at the time that he was under the Marvel contract. He was writing some of the best work he's
Yeah.
ever written.
Yeah, and look, we don't need to do a post-mortem on it
No,
right now, but what I will say is that, there's a reason people think he's such a great writer, and this is one of those stories, man. This when people say they're big fans of Brian Michael Bendis, they're talking about stuff like House of M. And I hope that people continue to know him for that. And what I really hope is that maybe he finds that spark again. But
yeah,
neither
I
here nor
mean
there.
he's done so. I mean, again, we will say this later on during Ultimate Journey, but he is the reason why Miles Morales exists.
Yeah, yeah. That in and
Yeah,
of itself would be enough of a legacy. But it turns
exactly.
out he did a lot of great stuff. But yeah.
But another very positive thing I have to say about this story is I definitely feel that this story shows a lot more than it tells. It
Hmm.
doesn't have a lot of dialogue, and it's extremely visual. And
Yes.
and and Olivia Coipel's artwork is stunning. I mean, I would definitely recommend you. I would love to do. Again, I'm looking for people over here on That's Comical to read more Miller World stuff, but check out the Magic Order. His work on the first series of the Magic Order is absolutely wonderful. So
Mm-hmm.
he is definitely one of the better artists out there. He doesn't really do as many projects as some of the other prominent artists in the comic book world are, but nowadays, I'm looking for his name
Yeah.
because I really appreciate his artwork.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you've hit on something with it's not a particularly wordy story, but it's one that is dripping with emotion. And you have to credit the art for a lot of that, which is not to say it's some sort of experiment in lack of prose. There is text all over these pages, but comparatively speaking, certainly in comparison to Crisis on Infinite Earths, which it's not really worth comparing these two stories, as they're just percolating in my head because they're major events that we have engaged with so recently. Our repertoire will expand as we go through the journey and start to have shared experiences we can go to liberally that are a little different. Um, but this is a very different kind of story, that focuses on the reactions we talk about just now with the scene of Peter Parker breaking down. It's about his head in his hands. It's about his dropping to his feet. It's about his, the seeing what is, and that visual spread of everything of who he was that I just keep coming back to in my mind is such a critical part of this story.
Yeah.
It's well done.
Yeah, and that's why it leads into another one of my favorite parts of the story, and that is when you don't you don't see it this time, you hear it first. I forgot who says it. I think it was Wolverine, but he says to Emma, "Not him. We're not waking him up. He's
Yeah,
lived his life." And then you
I can't
see,
remember who says it, but
I
yeah,
think
it
it
might
was
have been
it was
Wolverine.
Wolverine, and then you see across the street the elderly Steve Rogers, and they're saying, "We don't need him for this mission.
No,
Let him
he's
be."
not. They're like, he's let him go, let him do his thing.
I mean, don't
It's
get
the one person that they think, and I know there's the realistic, like how much could he help at this stage. I mean, he still got the super soldier serum, so actually, honestly, probably he could. But there's it's the one person they kind of draw the line where it's like, Spider-Man, despite everything, we're getting him, we're waking him up. Captain America, can't do it, we're just gonna do
but
it.
fear not, Captain America fans. Throughout this ultimate journey to Secret Wars, believe me, you're going to be seeing a lot of Captain America in this story.
Yes,
He
yes,
is going
you
to be a
will.
very crucial character in this story. So we get to the big finale here, and it is definitely one for the record books because we actually find out that throughout this entire time, the creator of this reality is not Wanda. She does, in fact, create it, but the person who put the idea in her head was Quicksilver.
Yeah.
And he only did it out of his own protection for his sister. And he said, I've got to find a way to prevent them from getting here. I was like, oh, let me tell Wanda, give them all everything that they ever wanted, and everything will go away.
Yeah.
And Wanda finally breaks. And this is where we see the one person who woke up like truly, truly go mad. And it's not Wanda, it's Magneto. Because Magneto is pissed beyond reprieve at what his son did. And I have seen when I've been a young kid and I got into serious trouble. Oh, believe me, I saw what would happen when my father got mad, but my father never got this
That
mad.
man.
Like, oh my God, Magneto is fuming.
Livid.
Because of the fact that his son made him do things that he knew he shouldn't do. Because even though he is proud of the fact that he is a mutant, based on what he sees, he feels that he has now officially become, thanks to Quicksilver, everything that he never wanted to be. He never wanted to be a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
He did want to be a leader for the purposes of showing mutants his own way, his own vision to a better life. But he never truly wanted to rule them. And that's what this reality did. He turned him into a dictator, an autocrat, something that he did not ever want to be.
Yeah.
So he is angry, and then he does something that pretty much creates where our true crossroads onto our next path in the journey. He kills Quicksilver. That's something that I was shocked by. I gotta be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. It, in a story with the major twist still to come in what we're going to be talking about, it still manages to be up there with one of the most jaw-dropping moments in the story, in what we're going to talk about. That was a big deal. And you're right, it comes from I mean, Peter has the breakdown, Magneto has the rage, from seeing what this was. And it is a very multi-level rage, because we already know that it's not exactly everyone's getting exactly what they want, or everyone's happy, right? It's not by magic. It's not like what people need versus what they want. But there is an element of, these people did have their minds read over time, and the reality created was one that matches with their desires, right? And for as much as Magneto doesn't want to be a dictator, I mean, if we're not going to call him a villain, which people are free to call Magneto a villain, he's at the very least a complex character. And you can see, especially in his more villainous moments, why this is the version of Magneto that the people around him, who even so far as read his thoughts, would think is what he wants, to have everything he wants. And when it's ripped away from him, he has both the anger of losing it that some people have, and also needing to grapple with the fact that this is antithetical to what I said I was trying to do. And there's an internal turmoil there that goes with the conflict between what he says, what he thinks, what he did, and what people think him to do. It's a very multi-layered rage. And I think the beauty of that is both the accuracy to the Magneto character, and also it then gives us the perfect explanation for killing Quicksilver.
Yeah, but
It needs to be that complex and that deep and that primal of a rage in order for that to not be some hokey, that's a twist, blah, blah, blah. but to be like a, oh shit, yeah, that's what happened.
But wait, there's more, because who witnesses this event take place? Wanda. And that is when Wanda, like, she's not losing herself within herself at this point. Now her eyes are wide open and she is like 100% with it and fixated on her father, saying, how could you? She's like, you didn't want to be this way, but you just did this action. You now officially have become everything you didn't want
Yeah.
to be.
You didn't
And
want to be this way. Now you are this way. And now you've reaffirmed yourself this way. It's
and
brutal.
she says in the end, and why are you this way? Because it's not just in this moment. Look at your life when she's finally bringing him back to
Yeah.
reality. You may have witnessed horrors. You may have been filled with pain and rage all your life. But at the end of the day, it was always about you and bringing your kind to become the superior race. You never truly wanted to be living alongside humans. And that's the other dangerous thing, because we didn't even talk about this. Charles Xavier is missing throughout this
Yeah.
entire story. And if Charles wasn't missing, this all could have been prevented, because what happens? Wanda decides to say 3 little words that will officially carry on this story and take us into a new level of storytelling. And those 3 words are, my friend,
No more mutants. So I will tell you, the first time I read this story, I cried. The on reread of that, I teared up. It wasn't it wasn't as big, but I find that moment so jarring and powerful. And look, we couldn't get, of course, we're talking about what is primarily an X-Men story. We couldn't get through even this review without talking about Chris Claremont, some of our favorite X-Men stories, telling people they should read the Dark Phoenix saga. It has nothing to do with Secret Wars, but you should just read it, man. And like all this stuff. And in Crisis on Infinite Earths, when the world is kind of simplified, right? It like helps the reader and the new reader, right? At this moment in House of M, when what it feels like to the person who has history with comics, that like this beautiful thing has been Thanos snapped away,
yeah, to a
right?
certain degree.
Um, it I find it deeply impactful as a reader, not just of the characters, but it feels like, and it's a major moment in comics. It's one of, I'm sure people would include it on their like top 10 shocking comics moments, top like biggest, but
It was definitely, I mean, again, I wasn't reading comics at the time, and I'm sorry for interrupting. I wasn't
oh,
reading
go for it.
comics at the time that this book was coming out. But I mean, I knew alongside Blackest Night, ironically, that this was one of the few stories that I knew that I had to read when I was going to play my catch up. And I got to be honest, that moment, like, again, that's why I think about Brian Michael Bendis, knowing that, he had some wonderful stories. And the fact that the last time there was something extremely outrageous in the stories that I could personally think of, not is probably X-Men 25, when Magneto sucked all the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. That was like the
Mhm.
last big jaw-dropping moment for me personally. And
Yeah,
I'm not even talking about the Age of Apocalypse,
yeah.
but you know, going all the way back to Chris Claremont not knowing how to end the Dark Phoenix saga and just walking into Jim Shooter's office and saying, all right, I figured it out. We're going to kill her. So I'm like, there you go. So here's another jaw dropping moment here. Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, says, no more mutants. They snap back into reality. Everybody's back to their old lives except for one little problem. The mutant population is now officially dwindled to only 198 mutants. Some mutants that we actually know and love, like Iceman, is walking all around the mansion crying because he's lost his powers. But at the same time, there's a little bit of comedy there, and like he's saying, "I've never felt so hot in my life."
Yeah.
I because Iceman is my favorite X-Man.
Sure.
So
I mean, it's a
that
great
broke
pick.
my heart.
Different conversation for a different day. Hard to go wrong. There's so many good choices. But yes. Yeah, and man, that moment, and that's the thing, we can dwell on it for a little bit because it's the big thing, and it's kind of why we're here. It hits you like a ton of bricks, that line. And then, to see, using Cerebra, and it's like that I mean, yesterday there were millions, millions. Look at this. And it's the just under 200 dots, mostly in the New York metro area.
Yeah, and also the
Like,
scenes where you're looking in the mansion and the students are crying. It's like, what do I do? Do I
and they
call
keep
my mom to
asking.
ask them to take me home? Like,
Yeah, they're all asking, what do I do? Do I call my mom? Are my powers coming back? Like, what happened? And like, the adults cannot answer these questions for the kids. Are your powers coming back?
they're trying to keep it together themselves. Like Emma Frost is looking like she's about to implode because she doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And it's just so scary because of the fact, like, I some of these characters that are frantic, I don't even know who they are, and yet I still feel for them. I mean, the most important thing that I will say is thank God when Wanda said no more mutants, thank God they didn't die.
Yeah.
So that was the one thing that I was a little bit relieved by,
I
So they
know,
lost
I
their
know.
powers. Thank God they didn't die.
It's like it still hits you like a ton of bricks, and I still have that feeling of like the stories and all of this, and like it just comes crashing down. But like there is a slight kindness in they are still alive.
Yeah.
um I mean, this is where then I think of and I love the original X-Men movies, man. I love them. But you see, we get our flash to Magneto, still in the ruins of Genosha, stepping on the fork and trying to move the fork.
Yeah.
I get flashes to the X-Men
With
films.
the scene with the chess piece.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it's just, so now here we are. We're now in this whole new reality. And if you thought that things were hard for mutants before this event, oh dear God, because it's all over the news. That's the worst thing that could happen. It's all over the news that mutants have been announcing that they've lost their powers, and now it's open season
yeah,
because all the people, whether it's the Friends of Humanity or who else ever, now that they know there's 198 mutants living in the world now, let's stamp them out while the getting's good. And that's terrifying.
yeah, yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, it like it really hits every time. It's
Yeah.
it is rough going, man.
I will
It is
say
rough
now,
going, but
after
a
having,
great
yeah,
story.
yeah, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, now that I'm actually comparing the discussion that we had with Crisis on Infinite Earths next to House of M, I think that there was a lot more enthusiasm with House of M. And I think it's just because of
Yeah,
the fact that it's a more, I mean, it's a big story, but it's much more compact. There aren't that many characters. The stakes don't necessarily feel as unbelievable. I think that might be the right term. Like, definitely, this is a little bit more down to earth. As when you take a look at Marvel compared to DC, that's usually what Marvel is compared to DC. But yeah, it's a fantastic book. And it's definitely a great place to start because now we're going to continue on this ultimate journey and figure out what's going to happen to these 198 mutants now.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, I think you're right. There's a little bit more. I think the emotional undercurrent of this story informs more than Crisis on Infinite Earth does. Crisis on Infinite Earth has big moments that are important for comic fans that hit us like a ton of bricks, and we talked about them. And anyone watching this video who didn't see that one, feel free to also do the DC journey with us and check that
Yes.
out. Um, but I think that the entire narrative force of this story is an emotional one. And because we're coming in media res, like it trades in it trades in the history of these characters and gives it away all in one 8 issue burst. It is action packed, it is emotion packed, it is a phenomenal story. And again, this is why people say Brian Michael Bendis is a great writer. It is
Absolutely.
stuff like this. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's where we're going to leave it, everybody. Brian Michael Bendis will be returning to a degree with the next chapter in our Ultimate Journey. After we turn this video off, Andy and I are really going to have to think about how we're going to present the next chapter of this
Talk
Ultimate
a little
Journey.
about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we really do appreciate the fact that you checked us out today. Feel free to leave a comment and a like. We'd love to talk to you about this book. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Do you agree with what we mentioned that is additional quote unquote required reading to understand and enjoy the story more? Is there something that we might have forgot to talk about? But we're looking forward to hearing from you. And of course, hit that notification bell and subscribe to the channel so you are up to date on this Ultimate Journey as well as the continuation of our DC Ultimate Journey, which we're going to be doing in our next recording of Ultimate Journey. But in the meantime, everyone, we will see you in the next one.